Hi everyone, welcome to the 11th Seek Talk, which we've called Why Community. I think back to a small group I was a part of, a small group of people who gathered together to try to figure out together how to experience more of God and more of Jesus, and that's what we did. And in that group, there was a guy who was a law student, and he had failed the bar. It was the California bar, a notoriously difficult bar exam to pass, I think 4 times. And that's not uncommon. It fails out a lot of people until you finally get it. But he obviously really wanted to pass the bar on his 5th time. And so he came up to me once and said a very reasonable thing, and I gave him a very unreasonable response. He said, "Dave, I love the group. It's been great, but I'm going to take the next 3 months off because I need to study for the bar day and night, because I can't really fail it one more time. I've got to pass it this time. And I'll look forward to seeing you again, and that'll be great." And I gave him sort of an uncharitable response. What I said was, "Oh, that'd be, of course, totally fine. I absolutely understand that. But I have a tendency to want to make another pitch. My pitch is to ask you, has it made a difference to you just being in the group itself? Has that made a difference to you?" He said it's changed everything. He had just started following Jesus. It was a totally new experience for him. And he felt as though with this group, things had really kind of stabilized in his life. He'd cheered up. A lot had happened for him that was positive, so he could be effusive. He went on and on and on and on. "Oh, yes, the group has been really great." I said, "Well, you know, in my experience, sometimes God honors people just sticking with community of one sort." So on the one hand, sure, you could save the, 2.5 hours, including transit time each week it takes to make this group happen, to get an extra 2.5 hours a week of studying between now and then. On the other hand, I wonder if that 2.5 hours a week would be repaid back to you multiple times over if you just stuck with a group as you were studying. Because here's what would happen for you. What would happen for you is people would be praying for you along the way. They'd be cheering you on. They'd be owning what's going on for you in this. They'd be asking God to help you with this. They'd be encouraging you in your faith along the way, that you wouldn't be tempted to be so despairing that if you didn't pass the bar, your life was over. In other words, you'd have such a sense of God's presence, of support, and of just personal growth. I think it would more than make up, even in such a stressful time, for the 2.5 hours a week that it'd be costing you. It's totally your call. Obviously, we'll welcome you back. And he looked at me, had a long pause, and I think he said, "It's just so crazy, I'll try it." And he decided to come, and he stuck with it. He was as good as his word. He was there every week and stuck with the group. The day of the bar exam comes and goes. He's not quite sure how it's went. He's feeling dicey. The day comes, he gets the letter. He brings the letter to the group unopened because he feels like it's the group's to know what happened. And so together with the group, he says, "Here we go. Let's find out what happened." He opens it up. He pulls the letter out, and he passed. And you would expect there was just an eruption because it was all our bar exam at that point. We were just sweating with him for it. Somebody ran out of the group then to get champagne and bring it back, for the experience together. And he came up to me later and he said, "That decision to see that the group itself was such an important thing for me to do, that is a transition for me in my life. I don't think I'd ever seen the world that way." Well, at this point of the Seek course, I often ask people in an actual live Seek course how the experience for them would have been different if they'd done it alone. Now, many of you watching this on a DVD or a video setting, you might, of course, be doing it alone, and that's understandable. But the best setting for Seek, I think, is always in a group. Because then, as we've talked about before, you can hear whatever this content is, you can digest it, and then you have a chance to talk it through. Is it bunk? Is it great? That works for me. That's hard for me. Here's my real question, which hasn't been addressed yet. What do you think about that? And in that process, people begin to form relationships and partnerships, and they feel like, I'm not in this alone. I'm doing this with people. And so I'll often throw it out to a group of folks who've just been doing Seek up to this 11th week, and I'll say, how would this experience have been different for you if you'd done it by listening to it in your car on the way to work, or if you'd done it even on a video format? Would it have been better, worse? Have you wasted time by spending all the time getting here and having a group experience around it? And people erupt at that point usually and say, it would have been so much more impoverished. It's the group, it's actually the people that I've seen around me that have made all the difference. No offense, Dave, you were great, you were really good. Dave, I'm not meaning to insult you, but the people in the group have been really what's important to me. Because what I see in them are real lives grappling with this stuff, real lives trying to encounter God and move forward. And that has really been consequential. I agree with that 100%. That's been my experience as well. So again, that's what I'd love to talk about a bit today. In my experience, what we get from groups is not just class benefits, it's not just content, it's not just knowledge about God, it's the people themselves. It's interesting. The Billy Graham organization, of all people, had an interesting bit of survey data. I was at a gathering of kind of spiritual leaders at one point some years back, and over lunch I met this guy, a fairly young guy, and I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Actually, I'm the head of statistics for the Billy Graham organization." I thought, well, that's interesting. The head of statistics, like what sort of statistics do you gather? You guys, I'm sure, are familiar with the Billy Graham organization, although it's fading, right? Because Billy Graham is a very old man as I speak now, so he's not doing much anymore. But Billy Graham, for those of you who might not know, is one of the more famous Western Christians of the 20th century. And as a young man in the 1950s, he started holding these festivals. At the time, they called them crusades, until current challenges with the Western and Islamic worlds have changed the term to festivals. Crusades got bad connotations. But they hold these festivals. And they would go to a town, and they would gather together all the leading pastors and spiritual leaders of the town who are sympathetic to Billy Graham coming and doing a festival. And they say, "Hey guys, here's what we'd love to do. We want to come to your town, and we'll get a big setting, the stadium in town or the arena in town or something, and bring everybody in your church, all your churches, and have them all bring friends who haven't encountered God much or Jesus much, and all come into the room, and I will give a wonderful presentation about who God is, and maybe they'll encounter God, and maybe your friends would want to come, on the one hand, because I'm kind of a famous guy, and so just to hear a famous guy talk about God might bring them. Maybe they'd come because we'll have wonderful music, it'll be a fun evening, and so they should come. And when they come, I'll give my little pitch, and after I give my pitch, I'll invite anybody who would like to come forward and say yes to Jesus for the first time. That's what he's famous for. And when people come forward, they're going to be met by counselors who will help each person know what their next steps are. Well, who are these counselors? They're the people in the churches in question. They've all been trained to be there, so when people come up, they can give them a packet about how to pray or how to find a local church or how to keep going in faith. And they've started then saying, could we call you back in 6 months to see how you're doing? And it really is. It's not telemarketing. It really is truly just because we see so many people in our travels each year, and we care about how you're doing. And so if it's all right, I'd love just to hear how you're doing. Is that all right? And for those that say yes, then they call them. Well, so they get all this statistical information from those calls happening all over the world to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people and maybe millions. They have a lot of statistics. So the question I asked this guy at lunch was, of all the statistics you get, what's your favorite? What's the most interesting statistic? And he paused and he said, that's an interesting question. He said, no one's ever directly asked me that one, but I have an answer. I have a favorite statistic. I think I now know something about how God works that nobody else on planet Earth except me and soon you is going to know. So, and now you're going to know this as well. He said, here's what I think I know. If you want to get something from God that you're going to like, what's the behavior which is most likely to get God to do something for you that you're going to like? I now know. I can prove it. I can prove it with such statistics that nobody else on earth has the stats that I have. I said, great, what's the answer? He said, well, here's the deal. The question we started asking people after 6 months, one of many, was, when you came down that evening at that wonderful event, in theory, you wanted to get something from God or get something from Jesus. 6 months in, have you gotten it? Yes or no? Check box, that's it. And then he would ask a series of behavioral questions. Do you pray 4 times a week? Do you read the Bible 4 times a week? Do you go to church 3 times a month? Do you go to a small group 3 times a month? Yada, yada, yada. And so all they did then is they found out, for those who got what they wanted from God, what was the behavior of those things they listed that would most get what you want from God? He said there's one answer that far and away trounces all the others, trounces them about getting what you want from God. And as you would guess from the subject of this talk, it's being in a small group, regularly going and joining in with a small group of people trying to follow God. Now you might say to yourself, that's kind of strange. Like praying, wouldn't praying be pretty central to the experience? Or a church or the Bible? We've been talking about all those things, and I certainly encourage you to do those things as we've talked about. But I asked him, why do you think that was the one behavior? Of all behaviors, why was that the one that just popped as the thing to do if you want to get the goods from God? And he looked at me quickly and said, Dave, I'm a statistician. We don't do why. I just tell you what is. And so, I don't know why either, but I have some guesses. So one guess is that Jesus himself has a strange thing to say. He says, where 2 or more are gathered together, I'll be there in their midst. As if, and you kind of think that's strange. So like when I'm alone, Jesus doesn't bother to show. It's like, get someone else, I'd be happy to be with you, Dave, but you're a little dull company personally. In a group, you tell the occasional winning emotional story, and I like that. It said, there's another passage which says, if you want Jesus to answer a prayer, just get 2 people together to pray the prayer, and it's got much better chances than being on your own. This 2 thing seems very important to Jesus. So I'm not quite sure why that is, but it seems like somehow people's own interaction, people agreeing on things, has a big, big impact. And I periodically I'll ask people, why do you think just being together in a group of people would make such a difference? And people will mention things like, I don't know, modeling. You see other people trying to do it, and it sort of encourages you to try to follow God too. Or there's a big word called accountability, that people might check up on how you're doing. How's life going? And that sort of helps most people just stick with something and do well. Or just prayer, just knowing that other people are going to pray for you. Maybe it's just that those are prayers that God will answer. Who knows? Maybe that's the reason. But it seems really tightly connected to how people have a good life with God. Let me throw out a little more perspective from the Bible on this that adds an interesting spin to this discussion, at least to my view. It'll be over here. So this is the book of Hebrews, and we get this. Think of ways to encourage one another to outbursts of love and good deeds. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage and warn each other, especially now that the day of Jesus' coming back again is drawing near. So as if we need to kind of keep pitching to each other, not to disperse, not to spread. And we did this talk the last time on evil. Well, it seems like one of the things that personalized evil tries to do is separate people from the herd to a certain degree, to wrench people away from other people. And Hebrews seems to have a real sharp eye out for the spiritual dynamics, the spiritual benefits of being together. Like, for instance, this passage. Be careful then, from Hebrews 3, dear brothers and sisters. Make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving, turning you away from the living God. You must warn each other every day, as long as it is called today, so that none of you will be deceived by sin and hardened against God. For if we are faithful to the end, trusting God just as firmly as when we first believed, we will share in all that belongs to Christ. So this is an interesting pitch. This seems to be saying every single day, it's the human condition, particularly the more you know God, that spiritual forces amass themselves against you. You're under a barrage from these spiritual forces we talked about in the last session. And how are you going to hang tough? Well, we talked about ways to hang tough last time. But one way we might conceivably think we should hang tough is just to become stronger personally. What are we supposed to do against these spiritual forces? Just get better, be more godly, be more spiritual, have more spiritual tactics we can play. And again, we mentioned several of those last week, so that's certainly true. But the passage here in Hebrews is intriguing. It seems to be saying, the way to fight spiritual forces against you? Hang together. You need to warn each other every day not to be hardened into the deceitfulness of sin, as it were. You need to hang together. So many people find that groups are helpful. Sometimes just having one other person that you're going to regularly get together with and talk about things of faith and get encouragement and prayer seems to fit this description quite nicely. And there's another interesting scripture, at least that interests me at the very least, from the Psalms that I'd love to pitch your way. How wonderful it is, says Psalm 133.